In section 2.3, we're going to go back and revisit those imaginary numbers that I showed you in Unit 1. Recall, so in the notes, by the way, we're on page 13. We're looking at section 2.3. Recall from Unit 1, square root of 4, that's just 2. Natural number, all good. Negative the square root of 4, that's negative 2, an integer, still all good. But the square root of negative 4, in chapter 1, we called that an imaginary number. Anytime we have a negative under a square root, we get an imaginary number. However, hopefully it would seem reasonable to you that this answer should somehow probably involve 2 a little bit. So we need to see how to simplify imaginary numbers. As for vocabulary, just a reminder that an imaginary number is the square root of a negative number. An imaginary number is the square root of, I think I might have said that wrong. I might have said the square root of an imaginary number. We're going to say the square root of a negative number. An imaginary number is the square root of a negative number. I know we wrote that in Unit 1, but get it down again just for good measure. And our trick for simplifying is all going to come down to this next step, the imaginary unit. We are going to define a new number. We are going to define the square root of negative 1 as the number I. A lowercase I is going to be defined as the square root of negative 1. And this is actually all we need to be able to simplify square roots of negative numbers. I think I'm not even going to write that process right now. We'll write that later. I just want to start showing you some problems. Letter A, the square root of negative 4. I can say that negative 4 is just negative 1 times 4. Well, what's the square root of negative 1? That's that number I just defined. Square root of negative 1 is I. But actually, I can also do the square root of 4. What's the square root of 4? 2. I'm going to get I times 2. That's not the standard way to write it, though. The standard way we're going to write it is 2I. The square root of negative 4 is 2I. Let me show you another. Letter B, the square root of negative 27. I'm going to start by saying this is the square root of negative 1 times 27. And what is the square root of negative 1? I really hope you just told me it's I. That's how we're defining I, to be the square root of negative 1. I'm going to write I root 27. Well, now, I'm just going to continue simplifying this normally. I'm going to break down that 27 into 9 times 3. Square root of 9 is 3. I can move that out front, and I'm going to get 3I root 3. I'm not actually going to need to see this very first step. If you have a negative inside your root, you can just move it out front as an I. I don't have to see you saying negative 1 times 27. If you go from square root of negative 27 to I root 27, I'm good with that. And then show me how you're breaking down that 27. Let's fill in our process. Step number 1, we're going to rewrite the square root of some sort of negative number as I times the square root of just the number. And why are we allowed to do this? Because the square root of negative 1 equals I. If I have the square root of a negative number, I'll write it as I times the square root of that number. Then, I'm just going to simplify like we did in that last video. Simplify the square root of your number. Break it down, show me the perfect square, times the leftovers and all that. That's it. Letter C. Negative the square root of 336. Shall I start by moving an I out front? You know what, actually, I don't think so. I don't have a negative inside my root. It's negative outside my root, so I'm just going to leave it. So how about you see if you can break down 336 and simplify that one, and our answer is just going to be a negative answer. 336, I'm going to say 16 times 21. You could have also said 4 times, I think, 84. This will give me negative, square root of 16 is 4, negative 4, root 21. That's it. In letter D, should I start D by moving an I outside the root? Here, yeah. I've got a negative outside, but that doesn't matter. I've got a negative inside. Square root of negative 1 is I, so I'm going to get negative 3I, root 224. See if you can keep going. I'm going to break 224 down into 16 times 14. Otherwise, you can do it, but I'll do it like that. Square root of 16 is 4, so I'll move a 4 out front. Negative 3I times 4, root 14. Negative 12I, root 14. And honestly, there shouldn't be that much to imaginary numbers. If you can simplify a square root, you can simplify an imaginary number. There's only one last part to this unit that we'll deal with over the next couple of videos, where we're going to look at not just imaginary numbers, but complex numbers, see how to simplify those and do all sorts of things with them.